We have a tremendous opportunity to make a difference and to be a leader in the state of California. Behavioral health does matter, and I'd like to have you join me, please, in a warm welcome for Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom.
Right here? Morning, everybody. Tell me, the highest ranking, I mean, that's a low bar, Lieutenant Governor. You got the senator here, so that's the real deal. Anyway, and by the way, acting governor today, so eat your heart out, Jerry Brown. He's in D.C., yeah, some climate thing or something. Good to be with you guys.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for being here. You know, when people are impacted by behavioral health, we don't receive a handbook, right? When we are diagnosed or our loved one is diagnosed with a mental illness or behavioral health, substance use issue, we don't know where to go and who to turn to. So can you tell all of us here a little bit about what your vision would be to elevate behavioral health within California?
Well, let's start with a vision. The state doesn't have one. There is no comprehensive strategy. There's no comprehensive plan as it relates to the issues of brain health. Only 24 plus or minus out of the 58 counties have anything that would approximate, quote unquote, comprehensive mental health services. So there's complete disconnect county to county, and then within the counties themselves. The intersectionality, obviously, of this issue is self-evident to everybody in this room. So number one, we've got to raise the bar of awareness to substantively address that stigma, to get people out of the shadows, to talk more openly and honestly about the issues of brain health. I focus on brain health because the brain's part of the body. Mm-hmm. And so the foundational frame there is we need to treat brain health on par with physical health. And we got one person agrees with that. And begin anew a conversation about an issue that impacts almost every other issue in the state of California. And frame it as such with the sense of urgency that this issue requires. And I think as a gubernatorial candidate, potentially in 15 days, as a governor-elect, the ability to use the bully pulpit to raise that bar of expectation and awareness perhaps is the most significant thing a governor can do in order to set the table of expectation to advance the issues that bring us all here today.
Okay. Thank you. A question about fragmentation and connecting the dots. You know, I reflect on so many of you who are here in this room, and whether it's from the healthcare provider perspective, we spend a lot of time connecting the dots within our own systems of care. Whether it's some of our representatives of sheriffs, law enforcement, judicial systems, we're all within our own systems trying to connect the dots. But perhaps the biggest challenge that we've got here in the state of California around behavioral health is it's a completely fragmented system. Could you talk a little bit about what we might consider doing, how we might think differently about connecting the dots for people who have behavioral health challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no substitute for leadership on it. And you're seeing leadership at the local level. I don't want to be dismissive, and there's extraordinary work that is happening at the local level. But it's not scaled throughout a state as extraordinarily diverse as ours. Some are doing a lot, some are doing absolutely nothing. And there's no set expectation to standardize that care across jurisdictions and to organize a collaborative to address those gaps. So again, the convening capacity of a governor from the prism of cultural competency always, bottom up, not top down. You can't sell down a behavioral health vision from Sacramento. It has to be realized at the local level. Localism at the end of the day is determinative. But you can set the table of expectation, but you also can incentivize better behavior at the local level from a framework of not just engagement, but from a resource perspective, from a funding perspective, that would invite and incite, I hope, stronger collaborations and partnerships ultimately to be formed.
Thank you.
That's great. And you talked a little bit about how you see brain health and physical health as the same. You know, when we talk about crisis response and crisis care, when somebody's having a heart attack on the side of the road, we call 911. and the ambulance shows up and people are around them, hugging them, telling them it's okay. They get to the hospital, their family's there, there's a treatment plan laid out very well. When somebody's having a mental health crisis, usually 911 is called, but law enforcement shows up. It's a very different path. Either you're going to the criminal justice system or you're going to emergency room. Sometimes you get into treatment, families, loved ones are locked out of the conversation. Can you talk a little bit more and elaborate on how you see the crisis response system within California, kind of, I guess, your vision on what you see could be better in integrating both physical and mental health when it comes to crisis response?
Well, I mean, I guess what I think about that question, I'm the emphasis crisis response. It's a fail first system, not a care first system. So the default is crisis response. And, you know, there's the old saw. I say it's old because I feel like I've been on this campaign trail for 15 years. But I've been saying it, you know, this is a state that, you know, well, the paradigm has to shift from treating brain health early as opposed to punishing it later. And so that orientation in terms of early screening and addressing the statistical realities that all of you in this room expressed through the work that you do, the studies, the data, your personal experiences, that these incidences, particularly for young folks, 50% of those below the age of 14, we're being able to identify, 75% by the age of 24, the opportunity to focus in the beginning and focus on addressing these issues in a more comprehensive manner, go deeply to mitigating the framework as you've expressed. And so foundationally, that should be the point of emphasis, the point to which I think most of us will agree the best money is invested, the best money is spent, both from a fiscal, the conservative perspective, and obviously the moral and ethical imperative of addressing these issues substantively and structurally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about children, if we might. We were talking earlier.
I got 4 of them. So
Yeah. I was sharing earlier.
Of material.
I've got my son along with me on this trip as well. And children can be so dramatically affected by behavioral health challenges, either children who have behavioral health challenges themselves or children in families who are experiencing behavioral health challenges. Your thoughts, please. You've spent a lot of time working on issues related to children and schools. Your thoughts about what we can do to make certain that we are really focused on our children as it relates to.
I mean, I have a deeper, more comprehensive framework around this, and I have a deep desire to focus on the new science that's come in that reinforces everything your grandmother already knew, and that is 85% of the brain is formed by the time you're just 3 years old. So if you want to deal with the root causes of so many of the issues society faces, then you've got to begin at the beginning. And that's around the framework of prenatal care, the issues of early Head Start, nurse home visits, first-time mothers, educating through framework of screening, issues related to ACEs, which is a big part of the space that obviously is coming to the fore around issues of behavioral health and early issues that may manifest before they're diagnosed a year, 2, 3, 4 years prior to the official diagnosis, and how we can pick up on those cues. But again, around the intentionality of truly beginning at those first few critical years of life, the architecture to which everything else can be built. And so that's a deep space for my bias. And I hope to demonstrate that in the first budget if we're successful in this state. And to the extent we can connect with all the extraordinary research that's being done as it relates to the issues of behavioral health and what's happening with many foundations in the state that are focusing on the trauma issues and the ACEs framework, not just the early brain development. I think there's real opportunities of collaborative that could ultimately advance a broader expectation, again, in terms of our capacity to solve some of these issues.
Thank you.
Very good.
You can boo as well. You don't have to applaud. But I will say, I mean, I just been enlivened by the we're finally getting serious about the brain, and we're finally investing in the brain. Even California has a version, this CalBrain issue. And Jim, I don't know if you may have been legislating on that, and I'm just learning about that, and the opportunities and the partnerships that we have at the UC, CSUs, and Larrett's here and others at UCS. I mean, just this treasure trove of talent and the research and the innovation. Technology is a big part of this as well. Sort of those, and that's another space, the innovation space, that we also have to invest time and energy in. I feel more attached to that now more than ever as I start to focus on early childhood education and early childhood development and start to appreciate, obviously, the connective tissue on this fundamental issue. Forgive me.
No, and if I may just add, and I think certainly one of the reasons this coalition came together, we talk about elevate, educate, and innovate. Many of us are sort of toiling in these fields, and many of you in this room have been for many, many years, but we lack the leverage of doing that together. And for many of us, we still lack the vocabulary to be able to have a conversation about this together. But the power of those of you in this room, the power of your leadership, how can we start a new conversation? Collective action. I think as a coalition, we believe collective action works and really have a new day as it relates to behavioral health.
We're having it. We're doing it right now. I don't know. I don't want to be Pollyannish about this. I don't want to be too optimistic or idealistic about it. But I got to tell you, having been out and about, and I did 40, I think I just did my 47th town hall, formal town hall, not the hundreds of other related versions of town halls. Anytime I get into the issue of behavioral health, everybody that's not paying attention, everyone's on their cell phone, people that are walking out, they turn around. I don't care if I'm in Fresno, Riverside, goes to your introduction. There's something about this issue that is a connective tissue that just there's a sense, a deep sense and desire, I think, for people to see real leadership in this space. It crosses, it's, as we're going at each other midterms, talking down to each other, not just past each other. It's the one point where everyone goes, well, hold on this is a safe space for, depoliticalization. This, as you say, connects every one of us. And so I just think the table is being set in a response to the anxieties that we're feeling, the anxieties in every way that manifest in so many different forms. But there is something, and I'll tell you, if you want an applause line, I'll tell you, if there's any applause line I have, is when I talk about when we put wellness centers back into public schools here in San Francisco. It's an amazing thing. I didn't mean that as a test, but to deal with, and I say, people say it's not just physical health needs, it's the adolescent mental health needs, and people get that, and we started to do a little bit of that, and we got in the middle schools, started to get in some of the high schools. It's resonant with folks. It's part of our community schools agenda in this state, more broadly on education and addressing the broader educational crisis, not in silo, but bringing those realities in to the work we do every single day in our K through 12 education system. But again, these are spaces where I just think there's a bandwidth, there's deep support and broad support. The question is how we resource it. And again, that's back to leadership and elevating this issue, and not just elevating even from the prism, dare I say, of California, a nation state, but also sharing those best practices across this state, getting other governors that are addressing these same challenging issues, and intentionally doing so in a way that reaches out to red state governors, not just blue state governors, to make the point that this crosses not just geographical lines, but also political lines, to also express it from an international frame. I don't know how many of you have sent me reports about, you see what Australia's doing? You see what the UK is doing on early diagnosis and intervention. So there's, this is not unique to the United States. If you listen to the NRA, you think it was, because that's their default excuse for mass shootings. But with respect, it's not. And so this is an opportunity as well to lead an international dialogue, not just a national or statewide dialogue.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. And on that point, we know that it takes about 8 to 10 years for people to seek any kind of treatment once the first symptom has come to play. And a lot of that has to do with stigma. And especially in unserved and underserved and underrepresented communities where the stigma is even heightened and they access care, oftentimes they don't go back for care. Can you tell us a little bit how you could lead California in destigmatizing behavioral health issues?
Yeah, I think, I think the most significant way is you have to share your own experiences. I think that's how you do it. You see more and more courage every day in that space. Well-known celebrities, even some athletes, that have had the courage to come out. Some politicians, not just Kennedys. Others are coming out. Some want to frame it in wellness, and that's fine too. Whatever it takes just to enter into that space, or mindfulness, which is a softener that allows people at least feel more comfortable with their issues. But I think substantively that's a way to begin anew this conversation. I mean, nothing more deeply personal than the experiences and expression that you had with a good friend of mine, very close, and a mentor in this space, Darrell Steinberg, and his connection to the issue that led to Prop 63, the Mental Health Services Act, et cetera. But that can be, that's extended to everybody that I imagine serves in the legislature, everyone that serves in the executive branch. I lost my grandfather to suicide, and prisoner of war, 5 years. World War II, came back a very different person, ultimately took his own life. I had a mother that self-medicated, deeply depressed, and self-medicated with, be candid, Wenti jugs from Safeway. That's how she went to bed. She was up at 4:35, working hard. But that was how she processed. Everybody, I don't think there's a family member I have that doesn't have some moment where they're struggled. I found out the other day, I was just casually, I didn't even know I was doing this a few weeks ago until you came up to me and said, I'm looking forward to this event. And I was casually talking to some members of my family. We had a member of my family lost his life a few weeks ago, and everyone feeling depressed, and everyone talking about the medication they're on, almost exclusively the entire family. Some form of medication. That's a whole nother issue. I was more worried about that for other reasons. And I think that's how you begin to do it, that's the job, again, of leadership. And leadership can be found anywhere. I'm not just talking about the guy or gal on the white horse in Sacramento. I'm talking about leaders in our own right and respective work that you do every single day to create the conditions where people are more willing to put things out there on the table and have those conversations, and particularly law enforcement. It's just interesting. I know the CCPOA and others are talking about the stress folks in the prison system. Some of the toughest, we talk about the toughest beat in law enforcement is, death row at San Quentin. It's legit. And the stresses that some of these tough guys go through, and that begins to destigmatize. The 22 lives that we lose every single day in the military. These young men and women come back, these heroes and taking their lives. I mean, that's a way of just sort of demystifying and dealing and putting a human face to all these issues. And then, candidly, we got to also hold ourselves to account to not mock folks. I remember even watching, I'm a MSNBC guy, but I remember that mayor up in Toronto, Ford, in the way we mocked him as he was dealing with alcohol and drug addictions, but with severe behavioral health issues, and we laughed about him. And even those fancy Democratic pundits were laughing at him. I mean, the way we laugh about, Kanye or something. We have to all be careful here. When people are, sitting out there, your heart should be going out to folks out there on the streets and sidewalks, empathy as well. We have to express our policy in those terms as well, and use language that really connects not just here but here. Forgive me, I belabor, but
no, not at all. Thank you for that word, empathy.
And also, thank you for the courage in telling your own story as well, because you're right, that does help reduce stigma, and it helps everybody in this room feel that they are a part of the conversation with you. So thank you.
So from empathy to challenges. Part of the purpose of this coalition is to get us over one of the challenges, and that is if we continue to fight and argue about the best thing to do as it relates to behavioral health, we will get nowhere. So one of the things that brought this coalition together, 50 statewide organizations, everyone touching behavioral health in a different way, was to say, what can we do together? But there are other kinds of challenges from a political perspective. Financing. None of what we're talking about will come cheaply. Your thoughts about either what more can we do as it relates to the challenges in this coalition, And what other challenges do we face in actually addressing and making a difference in some of these?
I mean, the money's there. It's just not wisely invested. I mean, we have universal, right? I mean, telling that at the hospitals. I mean, come on, go walk with me to any of the EDs in the city. I mean, I remember years and years ago, Mateer and Ross, Phil Mateer wrote an article about the million dollar man. I think this guy's name was Paul Sanchez, if my recollection serves me. It cost $1 million by some lazy estimates, just in a one calendar year. There's been other more contemporary examples of that. I mean, we're as dumb as we want to be. So reprioritizing, redirecting, I imagine substantively, as you came here with a fresh set of eyes, you said, you know what, this will be one of my top priorities. And it makes perfect sense from a fiduciary perspective. Also, you're enlightened. And that is what, I mean, so all of us can connect on with both levers and find that midpoint where we can begin to, begin the process to redirect our energies and ultimately redirect those resources in a way that ultimately generate real savings. And so I don't think it's about money as much as it's about resourcefulness and shifting our narrative around the conversation and beginning to expand the capacity. That said, I'm not naive, because I just remember as a mayor, when we had those big cuts after the macroeconomic downturn. Remember, I was a mayor of a county, not just a city. So behavioral health, those were the first easiest dollars to cut because they weren't necessarily matched with all those federal dollars. Now, I know it's part of the 10 essential benefits under the ACA. There may be some variance there, but back in the day, there was no real match like there. And so those are the first dollars to go. So I'm sensitive to that as well. I don't want to be dismissive of the money side. And that's why Prop 63 was so important. But it's also important to say this, got $1.6 billion that we at least identified in surpluses in those 63 accounts. I appreciate LA County wanting to sit on money, but not $900 million in this space. If you walk Skid Row, that's rather jaw-dropping. I don't need a supervisor telling me we need more money when you're sitting on $900 million under Prop 63. Forgive me, I know there's purpose for the resources being set aside, and I know some are going to have to be used to offset the funding related to our Prop 2, but nonetheless, money is often an excuse. Forgive me.
Thank you.
That was a dangerous place to be. I know, half of you were like, yeah, the other half, that's nonsense. I get it.
You have to be careful what you ask for. You say some people can boo. I do that. No, you're doing excellent. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, the mental health, behavioral health, substance use workforce oftentimes is reliant on licensed professionals. And we have a shortage, right, throughout California. Can you talk about maybe your views on how to utilize peers who have lived experience or other ways to diversify the workspace in behavioral health?
Yeah, I mean, look, not dissimilar to more broadly the healthcare issue. It becomes a deeply rural issue versus urban issue as well. And it's expressed often, and I use the word not lazily but intentionally, the cultural competency around this and making sure that we meet people not only where they are, but meet people where they are with people that look like themselves and have experiences, shared experiences you express in every way, shape, or form. And so that's fundamental, and that's a big part of any conversation around this space. And it's not just hiring more people, it's the quality of the folks that we hire. So training matters. And there's got to be an emphasis on quality, not just filling in slots and gaps. And then expanding, I like that in terms of the peer-to-peer and expanding that framework of engagement as well. These are deeper issues. We're going to have to tackle all of these issues more broadly as it relates to the broader issues of healthcare in a state as large as ours. Telemedicine components of that obviously have to be part of a conversation or any part of a solution. So look, I don't have the answers in all this space, but I'm open to those that do and making sure that they're showcased and are expressed, hopefully, with the sense of urgency that's required.
And we can be helpful there. I'm struck having conversations with some of our hospital members in more rural parts of the state. We still have broadband deserts. And so while telehealth provides a terrific opportunity to take advantage of the shortages we have of psychiatrists, psychologists, and other professionals, there are places where even that is not an option for us. So
That's
more
right.
needs to be done.
That's right. Yeah. No, opportunities, all of it.
So talk a little bit about next steps, whether that is opportunities for investment, innovation, creating change. Your thoughts, please. You have got representatives of this coalition, 50 statewide organizations in the room, and potential opportunities moving ahead.
You're all appointed to a commission. There you are. This is it. Sign-ups in the back. We'll see you in 16 days. And I want a plan in 90 days on my desk. And I'll announce it at the State of the State. There we go. We've solved this. I don't know it's that complicated.
Let me ask an easier question.
All right.
Talk a little bit, because we've been in conversation, how much of the problem that we face, whether it's this one, we're talking about behavioral health or others, some of these problems we can address on our own, and maybe in the absence of legislation.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, please. How much of this work can really be done by those of us here in this room? How much do we need to turn to our elected officials like Senator Bell and others? Give us your thoughts, your guidance on that, to really what we're seeking is an accelerated pace of change on this.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting. I was having a very interesting conversation a moment ago with another group, and they just identified all this legislation in their space that has passed, and it's meant nothing because no one's done anything with it. And the point was program passing is not problem solving. And the job of chief executive, again, in whatever respective roles you may have, is actually implement, do the work. And so one of the things that frustrates me is people like Jim, and it's not an indictment of the senator, but telling the executive branch to do their job. We should just do our job. You don't need legislation forcing the governor to create a new task force or convening body. Now, you may to create a special account, as we did last year, so we can start funding public-private investment in this space and more research and longitudinal data strategies. But in most places, you're right. Let's do. Let's not talk. Enough of with respect. No more reports. No more white papers. Ingest. No more task forces. We've been there, done that. They're just stacking on top of each other. Sure, they need to be contemporary, and sure, there's constant, never-ending iteration. I'm not naive about that, but it's an actionable agenda that's needed from the next governor. And again, my job is convening, and I don't know that I'm grossly exaggerating. I need everybody's name in this room. I need your email. I need you back, and not dismissingly so in 16 days. At the end of the day, the most significant work I think a governor gets done is when they're governor-elect. It's those key appointments, getting the right personnel there. It's not just the how business, it's the who business. And you are uniquely qualified to tell me who needs to be in these real positions of power and influence, but not in silos. That's the head of every agency that should have a brain health bias in every agency. So when I think of the lens of preschool and elementary and middle school, K through 12 more broadly, I think about Eloy Oakley's work at the community college system, let alone Tim White's at the CSU or Janet Napolitano at the UC. It's profoundly important that they have this mindset, this construct. So the folks in almost every key department have that consciousness of this space, and substantively in law enforcement. Because nothing more tragic than the overrepresentation of issues related to officer-involved shootings that are disproportionately impacting people with behavioral health issues, and some of the subtext in there, the racial issues. All these are profoundly challenging issues, and so I think that is a framework, again, where we don't need a legislative strategy as much as we need a strategy of execution.
Thank you.
Good.
And I know we want to go to questions from the audience as well, if we may do that. And if we could start, please, representing the California State Association of Counties. We have Supervisor Leticia Perez. And if you would kick us off, please.
Thank you very much. Lieutenant Governor, it is a privilege to hear brain health prioritized in the way that you are talking about it with such smoothness and clarity.
I know people call me smooth, but usually pejoratively, but thank you. But that's nice of you nonetheless. It's the hair, I think. I don't know what it is, but I got to work on that. Sorry.
The diversity of the coalition that has been reiterated, I think, has a unique excitement about you as an individual and your particular leadership and articulacy of the issue that I personally have not seen and that I am incredibly excited about and hopeful about. The silo issue, as we know, in a state of this size and complexity cannot be overstated. But what does this group do? This is a particularly bipartisan, open, ideologically broad. The breadth and depth here is special, and I think emphasized because of you and what you're doing. So what do we do specifically in the next, past the election, as a body representing 58 counties that has varying levels of commitment, frankly, Lieutenant Governor, as you know, but in an issue that has certainly reached a tipping point. We have a lot of hope in you and no pressure, but we are here with an incredible expectation about next steps. And so I know our co-hosts have emphasized this incredibly, but we are really eager for a very clear direction on where do we go on an issue that's so fundamental to a thriving community, brain health. And I love that term, and thank you.
No, I love it. Thank you for the question. Look, I've thought a lot about leadership in this new modern frame of leadership versus the old construct of leadership. The old construct, I thought, best described as command and control. Again, notion of selling down a vision, which I referenced earlier, versus the new brand of leadership, which is climate control, which is creating conditions where success becomes irresistible. And so my job is climate control of sorts. And let me express that a little bit more substantively. It's creating the framework to which we can have a collaborative engagement and to create those conditions where we can address those gaps in a way that invites the kind of collaborative that has invited all of you in this room and around this room. Look, there's not an issue related to the issue of mental health that hasn't been solved by somebody somewhere in this room. So it's a point of tremendous optimism from my humble perspective. But I haven't had the privilege of mining your brains and having the advantage of your experience. And so my job is to be a conduit and to somehow create a framework to convene all of you back with the kind of urgency that brought us here today, but with a real deliverable that can happen in 16 days, very differently than it can happen 2 weeks out before a governor's race. And so the answer to the question is we have to find a way to get back together, not in January. We have to figure out a way for all of you to get back together and give me the agenda, give me the parameters of your expectations and your expertise, and let me have the benefit of your collective wisdom to prioritize and to ultimately humanize this issue as we must in order to get the mind share to get the public behind any reforms.
And if I may, just in the spirit of conversation, Jessica and I were talking today, just the issue of 58 counties and the concern about consistency. You know, as some have said, if you get on a bus in Northern California and take it to Southern California, at any point in time you step out of that bus with a behavioral health condition, you will be treated differently. And one of our most important objectives is how do we get to some consistent standard of care as it relates to behavioral health in the state of California. Huge geography, 40 million people, but it's a tremendous challenge.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a nation state. Someone mentioned the other day, I loved it, there were 163 nations that signed the Paris Accords on the environment that were smaller in population than California. Which really puts in perspective this notion of a nation state. Not just 58 counties, but a lens of, depending on who you talk to, 470 plus cities with all of those related issues. So League of Cities, League of Counties, and being able to sort of stretch that engagement. But look, we have all these boards, all these commissions. Some are good. I imagine some leave you wanting. Some are just, opportunities to listen and complain and make people feel good that they're participating on them, but they're not necessarily all action-oriented. And so I need the assessment from you, what's working, what's not, what local programs are just off the charts, exceptional, why aren't they being replicated and scaled, or spread is the word. Some people don't like the word scale. They need to be spread. And then begin to really sort of build on that. So again, Jason's here, my staff. If he will have me, I'll have him in 16 days. I don't know, these campaign folks, they may end up going off to Iowa working on a presidential for someone else. But those who want to stick around, I want them to be around to engage and begin to have those conversations. I mean, truly, I don't want to grossly exaggerate it, but truly in 16, 17, 18 days. I just looked, this transition stuff, trust me, I didn't know this. I would have don't wait to get into a mayor's head in January, or governors, or any one of these chief exec. Get in the transition, because they stack you with binders and personnel, and you want to be in those conversations, not the conversations in the first 100 days. Frankly, those are too late.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have another question from Sheriff Brown.
Hey, Sheriff.
Excuse me, it's Sheriff Steve Moore. However, not a problem. Lieutenant Governor, I'm glad to hear your call to action. I think that is something we've been definitely needing, and especially in your idea of climate control mindset. How do you see specifically addressing the needs of the homeless individuals who are suffering from mental health and chronic substance abuse disorders within the law enforcement perspective? And as you know, we've become the de facto place for most of these people, and we're not getting that job done.
No, amen. Hey, God bless you. And we joke, when it's not a joke, we lament the largest mental health institution in the United States, the LA County Jail. And it's true, it's just a fact. And you can compare, I think I read a study the other day that since 95, I think there's a laziness. I'm a good Democrat, so I'm a partisan at times. Just wait till you see this new Trump commercial I did. By God, forgive me, Father. But in an effort to get out of that, it is an interesting fact. We all lazily blame Reagan for all our ills, right? We want to doubt Democrats, especially in behavioral health issues and homelessness. But just since 1995, we've shut down 44 facilities, 2,800 beds in the state of California for acute care in this space. That's since 1995. So that's happened on our watch, with all due respect. That's just a more contemporary example of our lack of real resolve around these issues. And default has been your county jail. And you've got, they don't go to the academy as a social sciences. You go to the academy with a law enforcement frame, and then you get a few extra hours in some sensitivity training, but it shouldn't be part of the core responsibilities. And that's certainly become the case, certainly with the local law enforcement are out in the streets and sidewalks that are responsible for addressing the needs of single adults that are disproportionate. Let's be candid, single adults, distinction, that are disproportionately self-medicating out on the streets and sidewalks with drug or alcohol addictions that obviously are masking their bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, paranoia, and the like. And so we have to relieve you of that stress and that responsibility. It's not your core job. It should not be. At the same time, we should not be naive about the pressures that places on local law enforcement, particularly local agencies like the San Francisco Police Department that have to deal with that engagement and do need that kind of training and support. But look, all of this that we're discussing goes deeply to your question and absolving you of that ultimate responsibility. And again, as a taxpayer, that may surprise some of you in this room, that is not wildly enthusiastic every time I write a check to the government, my hard-earned money, that I'm not a tax and spend liberal in the traditional sense. I want to know my money's being well invested. It's not when you are housing the burden and the problem. And I just think this is a self-evident opportunity to connect with like-minded fiscal conservatives to begin to encourage a redirection of investment into areas that will save profound amounts of money on the back end. Forgive me for the editorial in that respect.
Thank you. Thank you. From the National Association of Mental Illness, I'd like to call, please, on Sergio Aguilar Gaxiola.
Sir, we can hear you, though there's cameras maybe.
Well, thank you so much. You know, behavioral health has been the ugly duckling of public health for too long.
Yeah.
And in spite of what Carmela mentioned, that none of us escapes from this ever-present problem. So I want to thank you, and I'm sure that all of us here, for elevating behavioral health to not only this discussion, but ongoing discussions during your administration. So let me ask you this question. This is NAMI, California. Within our current systems of care, many families struggle to connect their loved ones living with behavioral health challenges to appropriate services quickly and without undue burden, especially within underserved and underrepresented communities. If elected governor, what strategies would you promote to help families better understand the behavioral health care system and more quickly and easily access services for their loved ones living with mental illness and or substance abuse challenges?
Yeah. I mean, so that goes broadly to everything we've expressed prior in terms of standardization, access to service, trying to meet people where they are, literally and figuratively, having a framework on demand. I mean, certainly from a treatment perspective, the goal is treatment on demand, and I would extend that to the brain health space. Look, the issue for me with families, and I get it consistently, is this very difficult issue that hasn't come up around the 5150s, the 72 hour, all these issues. And you know, I had a very good friend who I grew up with. We found him. He ended up taking his own life, but we found he was at the airport all the time, on his way to fly somewhere. Wildly successful. I wasn't Goldman Sachs, one of those places. Stockbroker, fancy family. Went to NDV with me. Anyway, everything going in his life, and they struggled. I was mayor at the time. They're like, help me help him, and we can't hold him. And when we hold him, we get him on meds, he's fine. But you're killing him. And they wanted more tools to coerce against his will. The problem is when he was on the meds, he was completely lucid and went in front of the judge. Judge says, I can't, you know, and that went deep into the real debate that was the Reagan versus sort of Carter debate around deinstitutionalization and some of the Supreme Court decisions that are the real story as it relates to deinstitutionalization, and the Thorazine and lithium and everything else, the psychotropics that were available in a community-based frame. So that's a tougher one. And I know if I probably split this room, there'd be civil libertarians on one side and those that are saying, no, enough. And I know that, Jim, you were dealing with this last year in the legislature, and governor signed off on some legislation to allow a little bit more of a coercive frame. But this is a tough, tough space. I walked Skid Row the other day with Mark Ridley Thomas. I was just thinking, if 2/3 of folks we came in contact, I don't care what they say, they're killing themselves. And we're complicit in their death. And they were sitting there saying, there's nothing I can do. So again, this is just a tough space. Everybody probably has a personal experience in this that shapes their position. All I am is expressing a personal frame as well as it relates to families that feel like California has been too indulgent, hasn't gone far enough, though I hear plenty of others who say we're gone way too far, and how dare we, shame on us. So I don't know where you end up on this, but I'm looking forward to your advice.
He's looking forward to my response. I worry. I mean, if anybody was following social media in Sacramento this weekend, right? There was a gentleman clearly in need, unclothed. And back to your point, Sheriff, they end up in two places, in jail or in the hospital emergency department. We've got to have better choices. We need more than 911. Where's our 211, our 311? Where are the alternate methods that we can educate families when you're faced with this. What's the right number to call? And we've got a lot of work left.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, we have from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Sandra Smith.
Thank you for being here. I'm representing your friend, Miss Alice Huffman, so I'll tell her you said hello. I'm very unique in many ways. I'm also the chair for the State Council for Developmental Disabilities for the state of California. I'm a parent of a 37-year-old autistic gentleman who has behavior concerns. I also lost my brother in a jail to a man who was put in with him that had mental illness. So I cover the gambit, and you've talked about all of them. I have a specific question, and I think you are the answer, and you can tell me after I give it to you. But before I go forward, I did read your answers to the questions we asked. You have your group. You don't need to get anybody together. We're here.
It.
We're here.
This is it.
We're all here.
I'm with you.
I'm talking for everybody. So anyway, often one person passes through many systems. For example, a person with cerebral palsy who has bipolar diagnosis, who has been self-medicating with narcotics, would pass through 3 major systems. This often leads to people falling through the cracks. How can we make services more customer-friendly so that a person experiences one system rather than many different systems, as you were just saying? But you're the answer, leadership.
Yeah, I mean, right, there's no substitute. Now, that's an investment. I mean, that's where we have to put some real money in. I mean, we can't figure out the damn DMV from a technology perspective. So I'm not naive about our ability to county with different systems and, and how to patch those things together. But clearly, you just hit it on the head. And I use the lazy term intersectionality. I mean, this notion of whole person care. We talk in terms of social services. I mean, foundationally, that's sort of the sweet spot where everyone is sort of ending up. And how do you design a system with that in mind? And that's a governance question. It's not just a technology or platform question. So that's something we have to think about in terms of, reorgs are tougher than they should be, because everyone's got a trophy on the wall, no one wants to move. But how do we create these sort of a crisis frame in the homeless vernacular, these crisis teams that are really multi-jurisdictional and multifaceted? How do we do that more broadly to connect the dot of the specific example you just laid out? And that we've got to figure that out. And look, there's been a lot of thoughts on that, a lot of work on that, good intentions, but clearly we're not delivering at the kind of scale. Look, I know that was the last question. Let me, if I may.
Please.
Look, one thing I don't underestimate is the enormity of this challenge. I don't. I mean, it is challenging because one size does not fit all. Everyone's expression is unique. Nobody else has it. It is a profoundly vexing issue. The brain, life, and yet no state more capable than this state to truly lead in this space. So from my humble perspective, I accept the challenge. I don't want to be a meme. I don't want to leave you wanting or disappointed. I don't want to come in here with all the good intentions, all hat, as they say in Texas, no cattle, and run short. Texas gets into my head. I am all things Texas. I'm competitive with Texas. Anyway, and so my job is to amplify your work and engage you, as you suggest, and a much more comprehensive way. And so you don't have my interest in that. I said yes to this enthusiastically because I'm committed to your work, not passively interested. Remember, interested people find excuses. Committed people find ways of getting things done. We can get things done at scale. So thank you for having me. Thank you all for all your extraordinary work. Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of Jessica, myself, and every single committed expert in this room, we thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.